The AIDS mythology is incredibly complicated. Anyone who tries to follow it has to memorize an enormous number of things. This is because there are so many assumptions involved. And yet one of the principles of science is that you try to have as few assumptions as possible. This is referred to as Occam's razor, after a 14th century philosopher, William of Ockham. And basically what he said is the fewer assumptions you have to explain a particular phenomenon, the better it is. At heart, AIDS is really a very simple proposition. And I will try, giving an eagle's eye view of the thing, to show how extremely simple AIDS really is.
Tonight on Heal This Week, the John Lauritsen Lecture.
Hi, I'm Michael Ellner, and this is Frank Banakis, and we're Heal This Week. Hi, Frank.
Good evening, Michael. How are you?
Good. So why don't you tell the people what's in store for them in tonight's episode?
Hello, everyone. Well, tonight we have a video presentation for you that we made last Tuesday night, a week ago, of John Lauritsen speaking at the forum at the Lesbian and Gay Community Center. John Lauritsen is the author of the book Poisoned by Prescription, the AZT Story, which is an excellent, excellent book that I recommend highly. He's also the author of a newer book called The AIDS War, and with Hank Wilson, Poppers and AIDS. John has been involved in AIDS dissidence since the very beginning. I knew of him and had discussions with him since as early as I think the end of 1981 or 82. And I think you're really going to appreciate this evening's show.
No, just a note of interest to the viewers. Frank Banakis is one of the pioneering dissidents, and all of his early writings now are resurfacing and being rehashed by a number of the leading dissident voices. And I noticed in reviewing this talk before we're screening it in the editing process, how much of what you laid out in the early work in '88 is now coming through as the dissident anthem almost. So it's quite pleasing to us that you're part of the group and continue with this visionary insight.
Thanks. Thank you. I want to mention that in these early discussions with John, John has been a major hero in this battle to find out what, in fact, is the cause of AIDS, and he has taken this case to act up and was at the silenced, in fact, at the Gay Community Center in the past, and it is truly a sign of the times here in 1993, 1994, that the dissidents are beginning to be heard, given the great disaster of the medical paradigm. Again, I hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation and listening to John Lauritsen, one of the great heroes.
Okay. I don't want to talk in technical words. I think we're all sick of what I would call techno-babble, which is the usual AIDS talk. And if I use more than 3 or 4 words of techno-babble, I hope that people will correct me. I think we've had quite enough of that sort of thing. There has been a great deal of censorship on AIDS, and some people find this hard to believe. They think when they read the New York Times, if it says all the news that's fit to print, that's what it means. Well, in fact, this is not true. There has been a real blackout on those of us who criticize the AIDS orthodoxies. Now, when I say we're AIDS dissidents, I mean basically we are people who reject the HIV/AIDS hypothesis, and we reject the larger paradigm of which that's a part. Censorship, however, is starting to lift. There have been several documentaries on ABC television which gave the viewpoint of us dissidents. I myself have been on the Tony Brown show twice, as have other AIDS dissidents. And at this very moment, there is a ferocious controversy in England between a popular scientific journal called Nature that has always upheld the AIDS orthodoxies and the Sunday Times, which is beginning to challenge those. Now, this is important because if you were to think of the world-class newspapers, there would be only a few. One would be the New York Times, one would be Le Monde in Paris, and the third would be the Times of London. It is one of the world's great papers. And so I want to show you the headline on the Sunday Times for last Sunday. Here it says, AIDS, why we want to be silenced. An attempt was made to, in effect, boycott the Sunday Times and still has stopped reporting on those people who criticized the AIDS orthodoxies. This made the managing editor of the Sunday Times mad as hell, and they are fighting back. And so, with one of the world's 3 or 4 or 5 great papers fighting on the side of AIDS dissidents, I think it will not be too long until the truth starts to break through. The AIDS mythology is incredibly complicated. Anyone who tries to follow it has to memorize an enormous number of things. This is because there are so many assumptions involved. And yet one of the principles of science is that you try to have as few assumptions as possible. This is referred to as Occam's razor, after a 14th century philosopher, William of Ockham. And basically what he said is the fewer assumptions you have to explain a particular phenomenon, the better it is. At heart, AIDS is really a very simple proposition. And I will try, giving an eagle's eye view of the thing, to show how extremely simple AIDS really is. I think that those of us who are AIDS dissidents have made one mistake, and I will say this in criticism. I think we have over-argued against the HIV/AIDS hypothesis. Basically, the hypothesis is very silly. There's nothing to it, and I hope I can show you why it is silly. It's very much like the fairy tale of Hans Christian Andersen, The Emperor's New Clothes. The moment of truth comes when the emperor is leading the parade. He has no clothes on at all. And finally, a child points out the fact that he is naked. The people very quickly realize it. They don't need 5 dozen arguments that the emperor is not wearing clothes. They see it. The emperor himself sees it immediately. However, and very few people remember the actual ending to the fairy tale, the emperor continues marching as though nothing had happened, simply to save face. That is sort of the, I think, position of the United States Public Health Service, which has made the greatest blunder in all of medical history in accepting the HIV/AIDS hypothesis. I think I would have to ask, why do people believe in the HIV hypothesis? And I think the parallels can be found in asking, why do children believe in Santa Claus? I've thought about this. And I think there are several reasons why children believe in Santa Claus. I think the main reason, and in a way the most poignant, is that children believe in Santa Claus because they are incapable of realizing at their age that their parents would lie to them. They trust their parents. They believe if their parents tell them something is true, that it must be true. Secondly, everybody said that there was a Santa Claus, and so therefore they assume that everybody else is right. And then there are probably some clever kids who realize that there are advantages, material and otherwise, in pretending to believe something even though it's silly. I mean, the idea that this huge fat man could come down a chimney, even in houses that didn't have fireplaces, and all of the rest of it, reindeer flying through the air, it is pretty silly. And for a kid to believe in this, I think takes a certain amount of duplicity. In the case of AIDS, I think there is a fourth reason, and the fourth reason is quite serious. Normally, in looking at a hypothesis, the thing to do would be evaluate it. See if the hypothesis can be verified or falsified using the available information. And then if the hypothesis is found to be false, which the HIV hypothesis certainly is, the next question is, all right, what are the causes of AIDS? What is AIDS and what are its causes? But I think here, especially among gay men, some of them are anticipating what alternative hypotheses might be, and they're afraid of them. They're afraid of them because they think that this might be blaming the victim. They might find that those particular gay men who are becoming sick in ways that are called AIDS may have in some way been responsible for the illnesses. Well, I will come back to this argument later. I'm not going to go into a long technical thing here. I have a reading list on the table which gives, I think, the major papers which refute the hypothesis. Many of them are written by Peter Duesberg, who is one of the world's leading authorities on retrovirology. The papers are not easy reading because much of the information is technical, but they are superbly written. And I truly believe that Peter Duesberg's critique of the HIV hypothesis, which is now, I would say, 5 or 6 major monographs, will go down in history as being important in the entire history of science. Let's just take one thing, what's known as Koch's postulates. These were a set of rules formulated in the 19th century by Robert Koch in order to establish whether or not a particular germ was responsible for causing a particular illness. The first postulate, which is simple sense, said that if a particular microbe is the cause of an illness, then you should find it in every single case. Now, in fact, this is not true. Not true in AIDS. The public health authorities, the AIDS establishment, lie about this. There has been an enormous amount of disinformation, but the fact remains that there are tens of thousands of cases of people with AIDS, or what would be AIDS, where there is no evidence whatever of either past or present HIV infection. There are no fewer than 60,000 cases of so-called AIDS which were never tested at all for HIV in any form whatsoever. Okay, at this point, why do I bother arguing any further? Are 100 more arguments necessary, or is this enough to say that HIV is not the cause of AIDS? Now, there are a whole set of arguments which come from molecular biology. These are technical, so I'll only refer to them in a very general way. But basically, these arguments say that it is not in the nature of retroviruses to cause illness. Retroviruses, compared to other viruses, are smaller and much, much simpler. And by their very nature, it is the nature of retroviruses to peacefully coexist with the host. In our genome, in the DNA that each of us has, there are somewhere between 50 and 100 retroviruses, which have been there for as long as human beings have existed. As long as our species has existed, there have been these retroviruses, which are passed from generation to generation. They're just part of our DNA. They don't do anything. And there is no way that they are different from HIV. HIV is an absolutely typical retrovirus, a profoundly conventional retrovirus, and retroviruses conventionally do not cause illness. There are a whole set of arguments refuting the HIV/AIDS hypothesis based on epidemiology, or what I would call survey research, since this was my field for 20 years before I became a full-time writer. These can be boiled down to the argument that AIDS is not behaving like an infectious disease. Infectious diseases spread, but AIDS is not spread. After all of these years, AIDS is still confined almost entirely to 2 main risk groups in the United States and Europe: intravenous drug users and gay men. On this basis and many others, the HIV/AIDS hypothesis cannot be true. And in terms of just common sense, as I'll show, once we look at what AIDS is, the HIV/AIDS hypothesis falls to pieces.
For more information, you can write HEAL, P.O. Box 1103, Old Chelsea Station, New York, New York, 10113, or you can call 212-873-0780.
Okay, the one alternative to it is what is called the risk-AIDS hypothesis. This is a term used by Peter Duesberg, and I have one major chapter in my book called the risk-AIDS hypothesis. It starts by looking at the most basic question of all: what is AIDS? And I'm going to give you a formula which the CDC would agree with. Any knowledgeable person in the AIDS establishment would agree with this, but they won't like it even so, because there are certain things that they would prefer not to see the light of day. AIDS can be defined according to a very simple formula, which I have put here. An indicator disease plus HIV equals AIDS. An indicator disease plus HIV equals AIDS. Okay, let's take this one element at a time. What are the indicator diseases? Originally, there were basically two. There was Kaposi sarcoma, and there was Pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. These were the two hallmark indicator diseases of AIDS. Since then, the list has grown and grown and grown. As far as I know, I am the first writer who ever managed to put together a full list of all of the indicator diseases and number them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 29, which is the last one. Now, most of us are able to count, but this is an analytical operation that is somewhat beyond the capabilities of the Centers for Disease Control. Because when I spoke to them, and they do have the nicest people there to answer questions, they had no such list. It took them 2 hours to find what all of the indicator diseases were, and then they got back to me. They faxed several tables taken from reports, and they took a letter which explained the 4 most recent things, and I myself had to set them down and number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, until I had the total count of 29 AIDS indicator diseases. They are extremely heterogeneous. I should emphasize first of all that not one single one of the AIDS indicator diseases is new. Every single one of them has causes other than HIV. I guess I'll put this down. They have all sorts of known causes. Some of the known causes of the AIDS indicator diseases are funguses, bacteria of various sorts, viruses of various sorts, heredity, toxins, malnutrition, all of these things. Some of the AIDS indicator diseases have absolutely no relationship to immune deficiency, and yet the official AIDS paradigm is as follows. According to the official AIDS paradigm, HIV causes a condition of immune deficiency, a certain type of immune deficiency. The immune deficiency in turn causes the 29 AIDS indicator diseases, which are referred to as opportunistic infections, meaning that a person of normal health or even halfway decent health would never get them. Only someone who is deathly ill and with almost no immune system at all would get these. However, some of the AIDS indicator diseases, such as neoplasms and cancers, such as dementia, such as wasting, are not in fact caused by immune deficiency. So therefore, even the basic paradigm is misleading here. So I submit to you that the one part of the formula, AIDS indicator diseases, is utterly absurd and preposterous because it assumes that it's part of a single entity holding all of these things together, and there is no reason to assume that it is a single disease entity. Let's take the next element of the formula, HIV. What evidence is there for HIV? Only recently a study was done trying to show how many Americans were infected with HIV, but they didn't test for the virus. They tested for antibodies, and there are two tests in common use here. One is called ELISA, and everyone knows ELISA is not very accurate. And then sometimes they back up the ELISA test with the Western blot test, which is supposed to be much more accurate. But all these do is, at best, define antibodies to HIV. Well, recently an article appeared in the journal Biotechnology, and I have it on my reading list there, done by Australian researchers. They found that the Western blot test does not in any way in the world identify antibodies to HIV. Maybe it does, but if somebody's ever had malaria, if they've had the flu, if they've been vaccinated by the flu, if they've abused drugs, all kinds of reasons will make them score positive on the Western blot test, and this has nothing to do with the virus. Now, if we're going to talk about infection, we're not talking about antibodies, let alone a test which is measuring things that have nothing to do with them. We're talking about the virus. If somebody is really sick with a viral disease, whether it's measles, chickenpox, or you name it, there will be enormous quantities of the virus in the body. The virus will be biochemically active. In HIV, this is not the case. When the attempt is made to actually cultivate HIV from someone who has AIDS, it is extraordinarily difficult, and consistently, for many years up to the present, it is totally impossible to cultivate HIV from the majority of people with AIDS. This is the gold standard for HIV infection. Is the virus there? Is the virus not there? In the majority of cases, either the virus is not there, or it is so totally inactive that it could not possibly be causing illness. At this point, I feel like I'm flogging a dead horse if I go on any longer. Please believe me, HIV is not the cause of AIDS.
Next week on Heal This Week, we'll have part 2 of the John Lauritsen lecture. Heal This Week will return in a moment.
Well, we hope everybody enjoyed tonight's presentation. I guess we want to wish them a Happy New Year.
Yes, Happy New Year, everyone, and I hope you all had a good holiday. Happy Hanukkah and Merry Christmas.
And I want to remind everybody that we are still looking for office space, 1,500 to 2,000 square feet. We meet every Wednesday at 208 West 13th Street at 8 p.m. We have satellite meetings in Harlem, the Bronx, and Brooklyn. For more information, give us a call. And thank you very, very much for the feedback and support for our live show with Bob Guccione Jr. And we're glad you enjoyed Mel Gibson's visit. And we'd like to do more of those in the future, but we need financial support. They're quite expensive to put on, but we think they're very worthwhile. So if you keep sending in the donations and supporting this work, we'll keep presenting live presentations. Thanks a lot, folks. Good night.
Good night.
Okay, what would recovery mean? Let's talk about recovery. I think I can make it very simple. Again, let's just talk about one individual. I think the first thing we should do, we'll assume the individual is actually sick. Some of them are not sick. Some of them get diagnoses when they're still in good health. But if they're sick, find out the causes of the illness and get rid of them. Again, this is so simple. With all of the complexities of the AIDS mythology, who wants to hear someone say that what you should do is find out why somebody's sick and take the appropriate steps?
Tonight on Heal This Week, Part 2 of the John Lauritsen lecture, The AIDS War, An Eagle's Eye View.
Now, the risk AIDS hypothesis is one way of looking at it. It begins by doing just what I've done, to deconstruct the formula by which AIDS is defined. To say that this is really absurd, what we should really look at is the fact that people who have AIDS diagnoses are sick people. They really are sick, and they're sick in a lot of different ways. Let's just assume that different groups of people and different individuals are getting sick in different ways and for different reasons. Let's take a look at these people, and this is something with billions of dollars spent on AIDS research. They have never done the simplest type of survey research that ought to be done, which is to say, really find out the characteristics of the people who have gotten AIDS diagnoses. The question should be, why are intravenous drug users getting sick? Why is a certain very, very tiny subset of gay men getting sick? And at this point, I want to interject that gay men are not at risk for AIDS. This is a lie which has hurt all of us. We all know people who have gotten AIDS. Don't get me wrong there. But gay men, as a group, are not at risk for AIDS. It is only a very tiny subset of gay men. And the reason why they became sick have nothing to do with their being gay, which is to say, nothing directly to do with sex. The simplest case, why are intravenous drug users getting sick, is they're getting sick because they put drugs in their body. They are sick from the toxins that they have injected. Gordon Stewart, who is the leading epidemiologist in Great Britain, did a study of intravenous drug users in the United States a couple of decades ago. He said that he was totally familiar with the profile of the AIDS patient, which is to say, someone with lung disease and emaciation. This is the classic profile of the intravenous drug user with AIDS. It is also the classic profile of the intravenous drug user. One of the New York City public health officials admitted in a public forum that here in New York City, in order for them to decide if an intravenous drug user has AIDS or not, assuming they have a guy with tuberculosis and emaciation, they have to give the HIV antibody test. If the person scores positive on the HIV antibody test, they say, this person has AIDS. HIV caused this. If the person scores negative on the HIV antibody test, they say this is just one more junkie with lung disease. Let me go back to my little formula. If we look at this one more time, instead of indicator disease, let's say tuberculosis. Tuberculosis plus HIV equals AIDS. Tuberculosis minus HIV equals tuberculosis. Peter Duesberg very mischievously has made another statement here. Dementia is one of the 29 AIDS indicator conditions. Dementia plus HIV equals AIDS. Dementia minus HIV equals stupid. Okay, I submit that the reason why intravenous drug users are sick is very simple, and people resist things that are so simple when we're faced with such an enormous complexity as the AIDS mythology. gay men getting sick? This may not be so simple. I think we have to deal with a number of factors here. I personally will say this: I have known many, many gay men with AIDS, directly and indirectly. I have had feedback from leaders in the People with AIDS Coalition, Positively Healthy, HEAL, many other groups, and they confirm my impressions here. We cannot think of any gay man who has an AIDS diagnosis who had not used a lot of drugs. Certain drugs were specific to the gay scene. Poppers, of course, is the most obvious because almost nobody except gay men used poppers on a regular basis. This was the premier gay drug, and in the 70s, every gay publication would be filled with many pages of full-page color advertisements for poppers. Poppers are now illegal in the United States and also New York State, but that doesn't mean that they're not sold quite openly. They're a terribly dangerous drug. They are a powerful mutagen, meaning they bust up the chromosomes. They cause severe, life-threatening anemia. They almost certainly cause cancer. Poppers are prime suspects for causing the one particular condition which gay men have and almost no other AIDS patients have, Kaposi sarcoma. A powerful oxidizing agent, a powerful mutagen, is exactly what you would expect to cause a condition like Kaposi sarcoma. But there were other drugs. I can't even keep track of them now, but there was a there was a long article in the magazine called Genre on crystal meth, a type of speed, which is now a popular gay drug. Ecstasy is now a popular gay drug. Things like Special K and MDA and all kinds of designer drugs that most of us have no idea what they are were at one time fashionable gay drugs. In the gay discotheque scene, the Saint, for example, most of the people who were heavily a part of this scene would be taking 4, 5, or 6 drugs in the course of an evening. So most of the designer drugs have never been studied. You will not find a medical literature on them, or it will be very skimpy. You can be sure that there is no medical literature on these drugs taken in combination, the drug interaction effects. What the combination would be of alcohol, poppers, Special K, ethyl chloride, ecstasy, and crystal meth in the course of an evening or maybe a weekend, nobody knows. One thing can be said with a great deal of certainty is that this sort of thing is very, very bad for the health. And I think the risk-AIDS hypothesis, when you get right down to it, it revolves around the concept of health. The entire idea would be to look, if you're talking about one individual and saying, why did this individual become sick, what health risks are there in this person's life? And drug abuse is certainly one of them. In addition to it, other risks present in the great majority of those gay men who got AIDS would be venereal diseases, not just once or twice, but perhaps several dozen times in the course of a decade. And this also means perhaps several dozen treatments with antibiotics. It also means that many of them were on antibiotics prophylactically. They would go to a gay doctor who would give them an open prescription for tetracycline. They would swallow a handful before going to the baths in order not to get gonorrhea still one more time. Antibiotics are not good. They are not good at all to take on a chronic basis. There are times, of course, when they are necessary, but not to take like that. And finally, I think we have to say that one of the things making gay men sick would be psychological factors. We live in a Judeo-Christian society which for 2,500 years, dating back to the Holiness Code of Leviticus, which established the death penalty for men who had sex together, which has said that gay men should die. This is the Judeo-Christian sexual morality. Gay men should die. And this is very bad for all of us. We can't pretend that it's not. We try to keep a sense of humor. We try to, offset it in some ways. But it leads into, directly and indirectly, low self-esteem, a loss of the will to live. It leads into things like sacrificial rituals, which is the way that I would characterize the type of scene that took place in the gay discotheques, bathhouses, and many of the other things which were our gay world. Okay, what would recovery mean? Let's talk about recovery. I think I can make it very simple. Again, let's just talk about one individual. I think the first thing we should do, we'll assume the individual is actually sick. Some of them are not sick. Some of them get diagnoses when they're still in good health. But if they're sick, find out the causes of the illness and get rid of them. Again, this is so simple. With all of the complexities of the AIDS mythology, who wants to hear someone say that what you should do is find out why somebody's sick and take the appropriate steps? Depending on the individual case, I think these are the steps that might be called for. Number one, keep poisons out of the body. That would mean keep recreational drugs out of the body. It would mean also, with regard to medical drugs, don't take the medical poisons that are being prescribed now. AZT is technically, literally, a poison. I'm not being rhetorical. It is technically defined as a poison. DDI and DDC are just as bad. And I have written, I suppose, several hundred pages on the topic of AZT, so I'll have to be brief here, but I'll come back to AZT. I think someone trying to recover from AIDS, again, have a concept of health, follow good health practices. Don't smoke. Exercise as much as possible, exercise. Eat good food, not just candy bars and Coca-Cola and potato chips, good food, a good balanced diet. Get fresh air. Now, of course, we live in New York City, but one does what's possible. You know, if it's a nice day, take a long brisk walk. If it isn't, close the window and turn on your air purifier. Get rest. Another step for recovery is don't trust doctors. This depends. If a bus hits you and your leg is shattered in a dozen pieces, you can trust your orthopedic surgeon. These are one of the good guys. Unfortunately, the doctors treating AIDS do not have the competence of orthopedic surgeons. And even though it may be okay to listen to them, they may have good advice for some things, don't let them talk you or your friend into taking AZT or DDI or DDC or a cocktail of all of these. They use all of these words. This is a pollution of discourse. Not only the technobabble, but there's words like cocktail. 3 different poisons in combination, and they call this a cocktail. And finally, one has to reject the voodoo messages, which are saying you should die, gay men should die. This is said over and over and over again. It's there. This has to be rejected. It's not easy, but people with AIDS, people with a friend with AIDS, you just have to say none of this rubbish is true. You'd have to say perhaps a person's health is not as good as it should be, but take the appropriate steps. There is no reason at all why the vast majority of people with AIDS cannot recover to full health. No reason why they could not live to a normal life expectancy. And as far as those who are merely HIV positive, please believe me, this is nothing but a scam. Nothing but a foul, horrible scam designed to sell nucleoside analogs. Billions of dollars of profits have already been made by Squibb and Boris Wellcome and the other manufacturers of AZT, DDI, DDC, and so on. The campaign of Living with HIV was part of this scam to get people, some of whom were not only in good health, they were healthier than the average person. I can picture in my mind several young men in their early 30s. If you looked at them, you would say these are healthy guys. But they were terrified by their positive test results. Their friends, their peers, their doctors, everybody told them they should take AZT to put time in their life, to extend the life, to delay the progression to AIDS. All a scam, every bit of it. Okay, I don't want to talk too long because I'd rather respond to questions. I think the main thing would be, where do we go from here? And to step back from all of this horrible mess that we're in, I think one thing, not just for us as gay men, but for everybody, is that we've got to start thinking long and hard about the idea of health. So much of medical practice in the United States is simply dependent upon diagnoses of specific illnesses, as though the body were a machine of sorts, where only one certain thing goes wrong. You know, like a car, where everything works fine except the transmission. Okay, fix the transmission. In the case of people, if they have a specific disease, there has to be a drug, which is the remedy. Well, there is colossal ignorance here. There have been studies of physicians where they find that most physicians know almost nothing about the drugs they prescribe. Almost their entire source of information are the detail men. Detail men is the word used for salesmen of the pharmaceutical commodities. So, I think that we and people have got to take very seriously, what does it mean to be healthy? This means not smoking. It means having satisfying work and companionship and all of the other things, fresh air and food and rest, all of the things that go into making a person healthy. And I suppose it may seem obsessional, but it means not smoking cigarettes. I would say that of the people I know with the AIDS diagnosis, more than half of them are heavy cigarette smokers. I have seen them, and I have heard other people describe it, taking prophylaxis for pneumocystis carini pneumonia. These are people who came close to death from this type of pneumonia, which, and let me say that I and every single one of you here have this particular microorganism in our lungs. It is ubiquitous. They now believe it's a fungus, although for years they thought it was a protozoa. But it's there. There's no running away from pneumocystis carini. It just sits there and it's totally harmless to most people. The idea that before taking aerosol pentamidine as prophylaxis against pneumocystis carini pneumonia, they would smoke a cigarette, and then as soon as they stopped inhaling this drug, they would light up another one in their hospital bed, that they would chain smoke one cigarette after another. People I have talked to in the street, so weak that they had to lean up against a wall to support themselves, one cigarette after another. Recovery from AIDS will involve common sense and good health practices. This is not what people mean. It's not what ACT UP has in mind when they demand a cure. They always love that. You know, it sounds very militant. They can jump up and down and scream and yell and lie down and do a die-in and whatever. Give us a cure. Well, what does that mean? There will never be a cure for AIDS. AIDS is not one single thing that can be cured. Will there be a cure for unhappiness? No. I mean, there will always, many of us will always be in a twilight zone between being happy and unhappy. Will there be a cure for poor health? No, it just means doing some things and not doing some things that make somebody healthy rather than sick. And as far as those of us who are gay men goes, and this is the bottom line, the time has come that we'll have to think long, hard, and deep about what kind of gay world we want. I was in the Gay Liberation Front back in the summer of 1969, and we had all kinds of ideas. We hardly agreed about anything, but we were idealistic. And one of the things we wanted was to get a gay world which would not be dependent on the mafia. Now, mafia actually is not the correct term. The correct term is mob. But at any rate, to have one which was not the hellish sort of thing that the gay bars have been before. In my opinion, things did not get better. They got far worse. And if I were to think of a definition of hell, I was not brought up as a Catholic, but my imagination likes the idea. I think I would always think of the saint or the mine shaft. Those two things. We've got to think about what kind of gay world we want. Here we are in the Gay Center. This serves all kinds of functions. I'm talking now, the meetings. But suppose somebody came here from out of town, maybe to live here, maybe just to visit. I've been in gay centers in cities all over the world: California, Bloomington, Indiana, Berlin, London. One thing they all had in common was that they were warm. There was something like a coffee house. You could go there to meet people. I don't see that here. It's something I would like to see here. But I would like to see, from the hellish sort of gay world that we have seen so far, the commercial sex industry, I think the time has come for gay men to set up an alternative, a real alternative, which would be pro-life. I think that's really all I have to say, and I'd like to hear what you have to say in the discussion period.
For more information, you can write HEAL, P.O. Box 1103, Old Chelsea Station, New York, New York, 10113, or you can call 212-873-0780. HEAL This Week will return in a moment. You can see more metallic sculpture like the one of Roger featured each week on HEAL This Week at the Cast Iron Gallery in Soho at 159 Mercer Street, just below Houston Street, starting Saturday, December 4th. For more information, call 212-274-8624.
Guys, it's only vitamins.
Vitamin C, you know, like in oranges.
If you don't want to lose your vitamins, make the FDA stop. Call the U.S. Senate and tell them that you want to take your vitamins in peace. If enough of us do that, it'll work.
Well, that was a wonderfully informative talk by John Lauritsen, and we are very appreciative of that, and I hope that he continues on with his great work.
With any luck, the fans from Treatment in Action and Treatment and Data are watching. Maybe they've learned something. HEAL urgently needs office space, folks. Please help us out. We certainly need to find a new home fast. We're looking for about 2,000 square feet. Also, please attend the HEAL meeting any Wednesday, 8 p.m. at 208 West 13th Street. We also have satellite meetings in the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Harlem. Thank you for watching, folks. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Frank.
Good night, Michael.